Virginia's legislative elections are arguably the most important occurring in November, as not only do they determine the balance of power in Virginia, but they also could set the political future for Governor Glenn Youngkin, as he's been floated as a potential presidential candidate in 2028. And naturally, him having a strong showing in this year's legislative elections could bode very well for his political future, since it proves he'd be able to build a unique coalition of voters to win a blue state that Republicans have not won very often in recent years. So in today's video, we're going to talk about the RNC's decision to deny the Virginia GOP more funding ahead of the legislative elections, and what this could potentially mean for Republicans going forward in November, and how Republicans shaping up in these legislative races. And we're going to talk about the dynamics at play there, what the Republicans are running on, what the Democrats are running on. And in a future video, we're going to go over some of the more competitive districts and sort of predict where the House of Delegates and State Senate may end up after the November election. So we're going to get to all of that in just a second. But first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. So Ronna McDaniel's RNC has decided to decline the Virginia GOP's request for cash ahead of the 2023 midterms. And it did so because it cited a summer meeting where the head of the Youngkin Political Action Committee, Spirit of Virginia, had reportedly told the RNC officials that they did not need to intervene in Virginia at that time. Now, of course, that was in the summer. It is, of course, the middle of October now. Things are changing. The Democrats have pumped a lot of money into this race. Joe Biden himself has urged Democrats to invest heavily in this race, as he probably knows the high stakes of these elections. The DNC has so far invested $1.5 million into these legislative elections, and these are very local elections. Again, the House of Delegates of Virginia has 100 districts, and as we're going to take a look in a little bit, only a handful of those are competitive, so $1.5 million in local races certainly goes a long way. But up until recently, the Republicans had a pretty large fundraising advantage. Now, the Virginia Republican Party isn't exactly helpless. Youngkin's political PAC, Spirit of Virginia, has raised $15.5 million since March, which is obviously a lot of money, and still has roughly $7 million on hand. Now, of course, there's other liberal super PAC spending here as well, so it's not really fair to say that Republicans are massively outraising the Democrats, because the Democrats are, of course, getting money in other ways, but the DNC itself is putting $1.5 million into this race. So far, the Republican National Committee has not put any money into Virginia. In fact, they're opting to put more money into Kentucky, which, as we've talked about in previous videos, is not nearly as competitive in my view. Andy Beshear is well ahead of Daniel Cameron. Daniel Cameron has not run a very strong campaign, and of course, flipping Kentucky at this point in time for the Republicans seems very unlikely. And now, even though Kentucky is a very Republican state, you have a very popular incumbent governor, and it's very rare for popular governors to lose re-election, even in deep red states where you have a Democrat as the governor. And his approval rating is high. He's polling well ahead of Daniel Cameron. So really, this is a waste of Republican resources, in my point of view, since the Virginia legislative races are much more competitive than Kentucky is at this point in time. So the RNC would rather spend money in Kentucky, which is a race that they're way less likely to win, than in some of these critical battleground seats in the state of Virginia. Now Virginia is a state that Republicans lost by 10 points in 2020. Youngkin was able to turn things around in 2021. And Republicans were able to win the House of Delegates as a result. So if Youngkin actually has a Republican trifecta, you can certainly change the political dynamics in a state. And that's something we could potentially see as a result of the 2022 midterms in the Rust Belt, where you had Democrats really mop the floor with some of the very unelectable Republican candidates that were being run there. Michigan, of course, Minnesota now has a Democratic trifecta. Pennsylvania has a democratically controlled House of Representatives there. So you have a sea change, I think, in the Rust Belt, and this is an opportunity for Republicans to actually expand the map. Now, of course, transforming Virginia from a decently blue state to a red state is not something that happens overnight, but Glenn Youngkin has so far been able to put a lot of money, a lot of Republican attention on Virginia, a state that Republicans really left high and dry, and sort of justifiably so given how bad they were doing in the state. But Glenn Youngkin almost single-handedly revived the Virginia Republican Party, and it's very important for him that he gets his trifecta in November. And it doesn't seem like the RNC really cares that much about winning such a critical victory in November. Again, they're more focused on winning a race that is probably at this point not nearly as winnable as winning the Virginia House of Delegates. Again, you're talking about an off year election where turnout's going to be lower. These elections are all about turnout. Republicans really need to be putting all their dollars into get out the vote efforts, early vote efforts, and Youngkin's PAC Spirit of Virginia has been doing a very good job at this, but of course it would help a lot more if the National Party was cooperative, but so far it seems they have no interest in putting funding in Virginia. Again, it's already the middle of October, so there's really not a whole lot of time left. Democrats have made a lot of these local races about abortion. They're running on the message that if Republicans take a trifecta in Virginia, they're going to ban abortion, they're going to repeal all the gun control laws. So basically, they're going with the typical Democratic playbook in that regard, trying to get their suburban and very liberal base out to vote. And of course, Republicans are more so running on Youngkin's message, and that's really what the Youngkin campaign has been trying to do to appeal to swing voters, talk about lowering taxes, mitigating inflation, things like that. More of the kitchen table issues that helped him win in 2021. He's touched on education as well, trying to improve Virginia's education system. So he's really going with more of the local issues. Democrats are trying to nationalize the race. They're trying to run on social issues because, again, the abortion position that Democrats hold is much more popular in Virginia than what Republicans hold. Republicans have the edge on the economy, though. And I think it's really going to be a battle about turnout. And so far, Virginia has really been one of the only states taking early voting very seriously. Youngkin has been utilizing early voting. He utilized it back in 2021. He's trying to get the Republican base to vote out early because, as we've seen in a number of swing states in the Rust Belt, Democrats are able to get a massive advantage when it comes to the early vote. And by election day, the day most Republicans actually decide to vote, they simply can't overcome it. So it's much easier when you have people that, can't necessarily vote on election day or forget to vote or are too busy to vote early, rather than waiting till the last minute and probably forgetting to vote or unable to vote. And then all of a sudden you have a pretty large Democratic victory because Republicans, it's not that they didn't have the numbers and the votes, it's just that they decided not to turn out. So Youngkin, I think, has been really masterful thus far in his strategy. I think it's really just down to what effect Dobbs is going to have in Virginia. Now, Virginia Republicans didn't fare as poorly as Republicans did in some of the Rust Belt states. Yes, the Republicans lost the popular vote in Virginia by around 3 points in 2022, but you look at Hung Cao's race, for example, in Virginia's 10th congressional district, that was a district that voted for Biden by around 18 points. Hung Cao only lost by, I believe, around 6 points. So he narrowed the gap quite a considerable amount. So you have candidates like Hung Cao, and then you have, of course, Yesli Vega, who was in a district that Youngkin won. She ended up losing by, I think, 4 or 5 points to Abigail Spanberger. So that really goes to show you right there the difference between a strong candidate in Hung Cao and a weak candidate in Yesli Vega. So Virginia Republicans overall ran better candidates. Jen Kiggins, of course, in Virginia's second, being able to defeat Elaine Luria. So Republicans in Virginia actually had more successes. Again, they were actually able to flip a seat Virginia's second. Pennsylvania Republicans, Michigan Republicans, Wisconsin Republicans, of course, none of them were able to flip any House seats at all. So the Virginia GOP, even in a year where Republicans were doing pretty poorly on the national level, did better. Again, you could take a look at the popular vote and say technically Virginia voted to the left of the nation. But again, given the circumstances of Dobbs, the Trump effect, I'd say the Virginia GOP fared as well as it could have. Of course, things could have been better with certain other candidates being chosen over others. But overall, the Virginia GOP didn't do half bad. Now, going into 2023, it really all depends on whether or not Youngkin's message is going to resonate with independents, or if independents are going to buy into the fear-mongering of Virginia Democrats. And, taking a look at the electoral map, there's 12 districts I've put as toss-up. Now, these aren't really necessarily complete toss-up races, as we're going to talk about in a video later this week. Some of these districts have a slight Democrat or Republican lead, but in theory, these are all of the non-safe districts in the House of Delegates. You've got 12 that are theoretically somewhat competitive, and then in the state Senate, you've got 6. Now, the state Senate's currently controlled by Democrats 22-18, and the House of Delegates is very narrowly controlled by Republicans by just a few seats. So both of these chambers are essentially toss-ups. The conventional wisdom says that the Democrats have a slight advantage in the state Senate. House of Delegates is certainly more of a toss-up. Now, of course, I tend to believe that if Republicans end up winning the House of Delegates, they'll probably end up winning the state Senate. And of course, if Democrats end up holding the state Senate, they'll probably flip the House of Delegates. Now, the state Senate wasn't actually up for election back in 2021, so of course we'll never really know how it would have went. I tend to believe that it probably would have flipped along with the House of Delegates, but we're also dealing with a new district map as a result of the 2020 census, so things are a bit different. Those were the old maps used in 2021. These elections are going to be decided by perhaps just hundreds of votes in these small key districts here that will ultimately determine the political future of Virginia. And again, if the RNC was actually serious about expanding the map and sort of developing a 50-state strategy, which to my knowledge, they have no intentions of doing that, I think that would be the smart thing to do for a party to run, slightly more moderate to even liberal Republicans in blue states, run conservative Republicans in red states, and sort of have a playbook in all 50 states in the country where you can actually make some of these races more competitive. But of course, the RNC is more concerned about 2024 and paying off Donald Trump's legal bills and things like that. So the RNC is certainly not in the position to do something like that. But you would think, at least in a state like Virginia, where you have a rising star in the GOP whose political future may hinge on the success of these races, you'd think they would put more money into it. But apparently, according to Ronna McDaniel and the other Republicans, that's not something very important to them. So ultimately, we'll see if this decision changes. Probably not, unless there is some sort of a late cash dump or an ad buy. But so far, it looks like the Spirit of Virginia PAC is on their own, along with some of the other more grassroots conservative organizations. But they certainly could use the help from the RNC to flip the state Senate and hold on to the House of Delegates, because this is really going to determine how successful the last 2 years of the Youngkin administration will be. And, if Youngkin has a strong term as governor, it certainly could propel him easily to the Republican nomination in 2028. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.